we're going to bring up Katie Prejean McGrady again to kind of wrap things up for us and give us another reminder, because we never have too many, about how we are holy and beloved.
Well, let's keep Vocation Story Hour going, shall we? I wanted to be a nun. I remember from a young age telling my mom that I thought I wanted to be a sister because I thought nuns got to read books all day long and they got to have their own room forever. And I thought that was magical. And I discerned with a couple of different communities for a little bit of time and visited one community and spent some time with the superior of the community. And she looked at me on the last day of this, it was a weekend. So it's like entry-level dating. And she said, I don't know that this is what you're called to. And I didn't know nuns were allowed to do that. Like, I thought it was like, wait, no, but I wanna, you don't want me? Like, it was not a reject, I had not applied. This was the first weekend. But she said something that I've never forgotten. She said that your vocation, your call to holiness, is a call to be stretched. Not like a stretching of massive discomfort, but to stretch outside of your comfort zone. And if your dream for your life is to just sit around and read books all day, which I know is not what nuns did, but in my very innocent mind, I thought that's what they got to do all the time. And that seemed like a dream. I was the kid that snuck a book out onto the soccer field when my parents signed me up for soccer and would hide in the corner of the goal and read because I didn't want to play soccer, but my parents wanted me to. And she said, a vocation is a stretching. And you should look for the areas and the ways and the places that the Lord is trying to stretch you beyond your comfort zone. And so for me, that would have been dating, right? Because dating, I don't know if you know this, if you have not dated in a while, is the worst. And in the 21st century with this thing, it is awful. And this was before the time of Tinder where people were swiping on you and affirming your goodness or calling you horrible. This is before even more of the hookup culture that we seem to have established. I mean, this was college with all these awesome Catholic guys that didn't know how to ask somebody out. Or then you realize, wait, maybe I'm just not worth asking out. And then you do go out on a few dates with somebody, and so then in your mind it's like ring by spring, right? We got to ramp this up, and I got to be married by 22 or otherwise I'm going to be behind. And I found myself graduating from college and moving to Chicago to work in a parish youth ministry job with, as if it was from Pride and Prejudice, no prospects. And I went on a horrible date with a guy up in Chicago that somebody had set me up with from the parish. And when you work at a parish and you're the youngest person, I'm telling you a massively abbreviated version of the story to get to the really good part. But I worked in a parish where I was the youngest person by 35 years. So they set me up with this guy who was 40 and single. And he was a very sweet man, but I was 22. So this would not have been a good match. But he was lonely, I was lonely, Lonely Hearts Club. And then he made me pay for my own meal. So it wasn't even a real date. I called my mom that night and I was like, I'm going to die alone in this apartment in Chicago. I need a dog, maybe a cat. Maybe that would be better for the story. I eventually moved back to Lake Charles, Louisiana, and was at a phase of my life where, you know what, I'm just going to be married to my work. I was a youth minister. I was a teacher. I was really good at those things. I had a really great level of influence in my town and my community. I didn't need a guy. I dated off and on, but none of them were ever going to go anywhere. I brought one guy over to my parents' house one time, and he left a little bit before I did, and my dad just looked at me and he just shook his head. I was like, I wasn't looking for your approval, but thank you. And it was April of 2014. I was kind of just at this low point in discernment, if you can even call, that's what I was doing. Just kind of living that phase of I'm unsettled, I'm unhappy, but I still have these words of this nun in my head that maybe I'm not supposed to go to religious life, but I didn't even want to entertain it anymore. And there was a lot of woundedness that I didn't even know I would one day need to work through in therapy. And I decided I was going to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet that year. Because, if you want your life to change, just tell Jesus, I trust in you, and see what happens. And so I did. I prayed the Divine Mercy Novena, and I prayed it with a very specific intention for my vocation, whatever that would be. And on Divine Mercy Sunday, April 27th, 2014, sat in my home parish, Our Lady Queen of Heaven Catholic Church, and said the last day of the novena, and basically just we had Eucharistic adoration at the parish, looked up at the monstrance and gave Jesus the ultimatum. It's either a guy or a community. Like, I gotta stop this restless nothing. Because at the time I didn't realize the fruitfulness that the single life can bring. I didn't realize what I could really be pouring into in my own life or into the lives of other people. And it was really only years later that I realized, wait, there were some really grace-filled moments that I was just trying to ignore because I felt like I needed to keep up with my friends who were married or my friends who had entered religious life, and just none of it was good. But there was also still a lot of goodness in it. And 10 days later, I posted a blog on my Facebook page, because that's what millennials do, celebrating my 2-year anniversary of being a parish youth minister. And this guy in Scranton, Pennsylvania that I was Facebook friends with because we had mutual youth ministry friends, and that's how social media works, saw the blog, read the blog, liked the blog, sent me a message that just said, hey, I read your blog. I thought it was really great. I'm in ministry too. Please know that I'm praying for you. And he did the most millennial thing imaginable. He added a winky face emoji to the end of his message, which was like this is a flirty message. And as they say, the rest is history. We started chatting back and forth a little bit. We exchanged phone numbers. He called me that night. We spent 3 hours on the phone. The next day, he sent my younger sister a Facebook message asking for my address so he could send me flowers, which she thought was creepy, so she did not send him my address. Thank you, Laura. Protected me. But he then found my school address, because I was a teacher, and sent flowers to the school. Very romantic. Now, in hindsight, it's like, I don't think you can get away with that in 2021, but it worked in 2014. I flew up to Scranton, Pennsylvania 32 days later. My parents thought I was insane. You met a guy where? My mom made me find my friends on my phone so she could track me the whole time to make sure I wasn't going to get killed. And there's just something about when you know it's right. And I know that sounds cheesy, and so many of you are married, and you all have your meet cute story. And some of you are engaged or longing to be married or are dating or are in that I don't know what the Lord is calling me to, or discerning religious life. There's so many different phases of this moment where you eventually arrive at a place where you feel that perfect peace. And it was when I flew into Newark, which is the armpit of America, but that's where I knew I was in love with this guy, where I walk out of the B terminal next to the Hudson News, and there's this guy standing there in a lime green polo. Worst shirt imaginable. A little shorter than I thought he was, at least from you can't really guess somebody's height on the phone, but I thought he was taller. But that was okay. I'm not very tall. He had curly black hair. And he wasn't holding flowers or jewelry or anything. He knew I'd been traveling the whole day. And so he showed up to the airport with a box of Krispy Kreme donuts. And that's when I knew. He's the one. We spent a few days together, and I remember texting my sister on the flight home, and I was like, he's the one. And she's like, are you sure? I was like, he's the one. I know that sounds cheesy, and I know that sounds weird, and it's like we met on Facebook, and I flew to Scranton, and we dated long distance for 15 months, and he sent me on a scavenger hunt that ended in a library when we got engaged, and you look at the two of us, and I'm kind of introverted. I know you might not believe that, but I'm kind of introverted, and I'm actually pretty quiet, and other than what I do professionally, and I kind of keep to myself in certain things, and my husband is Tigger from the 100 Acre Woods. He is gregarious, he is outgoing, he fills a room with his energy, he acts, he does track. From high school, he was a football player. He was Mr. Popular, and I was kid who snuck a book out to the goal at soccer practice. And yet, I think the Lord brings you to the person that stretches you and that calls out of you the best parts. Last week, we actually had a horrible fight. This usually tends to happen when you're traveling. The Lord attacks the most important thing in your life. And I yelled at him across the living room. He'd done nothing wrong except chew too loudly. And most of marriage is just listening to another person chew and cough. I'm convinced of it. And you just like them enough to where you put up with it. But then some days you're just you're chewing too loudly. And he literally had walked into the living room with a paper bowl of trail mix and was eating it like a squirrel. To the men in the room, don't eat trail mix in front of your wife who's been home all day long with a sick 1-year-old who also had to do 2 hours of live radio. I was just at my wit's end. And I looked at him and I was like, are you serious right now? He's like, what did I do? And I was like, what, like, do you even, and I just like yelled at him. I was like, I feel like I don't even know you anymore. He's like, because I'm eating trail mix? I was like, yes, because you're eating trail mix. This is what marriage does, right? It brings you to the very end of yourself. And then it came out, and we realized as we like pulled out our phones and looked at our calendars and like realized we'd been like ships in the night for the past few weeks, like parental coworkers living in the same house, but like never actually like sitting down and having a conversation with each other, never actually talking through like what's going on at school or what's going on at work, or like I'm really excited about this trip because I get to hang out with Wawa. That's what we call my sister, sorry. She has a real name, and it is Laura, but I don't think I've called her that in a very long time. And I said, I just feel like we haven't spent any time together. The next morning at 9 a.m., I get a text message from my husband that says, don't take anything out for dinner tonight and pick out a nice dress. And he'd made some dinner reservations at one of our favorite restaurants, and then we went out and got drinks and dessert at another place afterwards. And it was a date night. It's not earth-shatteringly amazing. But it was time. Because when you're in love with somebody, like your spouse, hopefully, you want to spend time with them. And when you don't get that time, it wears on you. It wears on your soul. It wears on your mind. It wears on your heart. You start to, all these other things start to crack within your life, because it is the most foundational relationship in my life, is with this man that I've created children with this man that I make decisions with this man that we're growing a home and we're building a family with. And when we don't take the time for each other, it's everything in our life suffers. My relationship with my kids suffer. My relationship with my coworkers suffer. With my parents, everything suffers if I'm not focusing on building that and keeping that central. And I know that you all know this because some of you have been married longer than I've been alive. And I know that you could probably get up here and tell your own version of a meet cute story, that you remember the moment that you met the guy, or you remember the moment where you fell in love, or you remember those days where like that little thing annoyed you, but then this other little thing just totally made your heart swell. And I always go back to that sister that kind of crushed my dreams, but then also completely brought me to precisely where the Lord always wanted me, which was, you're stretched so that there's not the Lord breaks you open, but the Lord reveals the things within your life that need to be filled up with a love from him and the love from others that really form your vocation. You are most yourself when you have found your vocation. You become who God always wanted you to be. And I never would have imagined I would have married a Yankee from Pennsylvania who's 5'5" and as loud as my husband is. And yet, I can't imagine my life any other way. And I don't think my family can either. My parents were actually really resistant to the fact that I was dating this guy, because I got on a plane to go meet a man I met on the internet. My parents met at a bar that my grandfather owned after being set up by a cop, like the most 1970s romance you can imagine. And I met a boy on Facebook. And it wasn't until he visited Lake Charles for the first time, he sent my mom a dozen roses and her favorite candy. He went to my dad's office with a bottle of scotch. He was totally bribing them to get them to like him. He called my sister the wrong name the first time he Skyped with her, because she was in, I don't even know where she was. She was out of town. He thought she was in Chicago. I think she was in Michigan. And he was like, hey, Lauren, how's Chicago? Not her name, not where she was. But all three of my immediate family members, my mom, my dad, and my sister, all confirmed really within the first few months that we were dating. If you like him, it's very obvious that he likes you. And if this is what the Lord is calling you to, then we, your family who know you best, are here to confirm that we see that as well. And I think when we talk about vocations, and this was truly not the way I thought I was going to wrap up the day, but the Lord also totally redirected my talk and sister's talks in certain ways to the way they were complementary. And hearing the vocation witnesses that we have, I think it should be said that so often we have this vision of vocation as the thing that we do that makes us holy. And it is through our vocation that God is doing something within us that allows us to be holy in the world. I get to travel to a lot of places. I talk to thousands of people on the radio every day, and none of it is nearly as important as the conversation I get to have with my husband at 5 o'clock every morning when we wake up and have a cup of coffee and read the gospel together. None of it holds a candle to when I drop Rose off at school in the morning and she gives me that hug goodbye before she hops out of the minivan and trots off waving at people, because Rose is her father, and so she waves at people as she walks into rooms. None of it's as valuable as the one-on-one time that I get with my 1-year-old before the nanny shows up at noon. And it's just me and Claire. I didn't really talk a whole lot about Claire earlier. I do have a second child. Her name is Claire. She's the calmest child on planet Earth. You kind of forget she's there because she's so quiet. Our joke about Claire is she's just happy to be here, which is true. She was born in between 2 major hurricanes hitting my hometown. We brought her home to my grandfather's house. We added the name of the hurricane into her name because it was so important. She's just a miraculous little kid. Our vocation allows the Lord to do a great work within us so that we can then do a great work in this world, in the particular places and spaces that he calls us. And we're better at that, whatever that particular vocation looks like, whatever it is that the Lord has called us to at different stages and phases, to recognize the holiness that we are called to and the belovedness that we have. The only way to really truly change the world, I'm convinced, is if we know that our vocation is where and how and when God will do a great work in our lives. And I think we spend so much time talking about the vocational call, as we should, that we sometimes forget to also maybe zoom out a little bit and see, like Sister said, the far-reaching effects of the vocation. The conversation that Rose had with Sister Miriam Ruth, who feels called to the religious life and has answered that vocation because of the family that she was raised in and the influences of people that led her to discerning religious life, that's now affecting my 4-year-old, who looks at her with these eyes of wonder and is amazed, and then comes back home and tells us things like Sister Miriam Ruth led us in the Angelus and reminds me that, hey, I should be praying the Angelus. And so in this cyclical way, the nun at drop-off reminded me to do my daily prayer, which is so easy for me to do because I'm home at 12 o'clock, and why shouldn't I do it? Leads to the conversation with Tommy at the dinner table, and Rose gets to fill him in about the fact that they got to take a tour of the church, and Father Nathan opened up their tabernacle and showed them the gold inside the Jesus box. They're Jesus mommies, and it's a Jesus box. Like that's the world that Rose lives in. That interconnectedness of every vocation in the life of the church. Mine as a married woman, sisters as a religious sister, father as a father, single people discerning their vocation or living out their single life, whatever we're doing, that interconnectedness is ultimately trying to get us all home to God. It's fitting that I tell this story now, and it was never on my agenda to tell this story at all, but Rose was born August 24th. That is the day after St. Rose of Lima's feast day. It's the 400th anniversary, actually, of St. Rose of Lima's death. So 400 years to the day that we lost a Rose in this world, my Rose came in. I always kind of, have had this thought in my head of, you want your kids to have this great life, right? So Rose is born on the Friday. We go home, on the Thursday. We head home on the Saturday, and we left the hospital about noon. We're maybe 20 minutes from our house, and my phone buzzes, and it's my good friend, Father Trey Angie. Father Trey was my first small group leader at the first retreat I ever went to as a 14-year-old, the Agape retreat in the Diocese of Lake Charles. Father Trey and my husband are best buds because they're the same. They're outgoing, they're bubbly, they own the room. And he called me and he said, hey, what room are y'all in at the hospital? He was going to come visit. I said, oh, we just left. He said, oh, great, I'll see you at your house. And my first thought was, I just had a baby. I don't want to see a celibate man at my house right now. But Father Trey's a friend. Like, Father Trey was the guy that when we got married at our rehearsal dinner, he made a point of learning the names of everybody that had come in for the wedding from out of town. And welcome, he was like the MC of our wedding. Like he literally altar served it and MC'd it, but then at our rehearsal dinner and then at our reception was like the guy that got the party started. We're very, very close to him. So we pull into our driveway 15, 20 minutes later. Sure enough, Father Trey's waiting in front of my house. And we start unloading the car. And I just had a baby in a 4th degree episiotomy. I can't lift anything, so I'm carrying my hemorrhoid pillow. That's the one thing I had in my hand. bright yellow. It was my grandmother's, and my mom had given it to me before we left for the hospital. It's the one thing I had in my hand. Tommy has the duffel bag, he has the backpack, he has this grocery bag full of snacks, and we make our way into the house, and first-time parents, we turn around and we realize we don't have the child. And Father Trey is holding the car seat and steps over the threshold of our house and actually carried our daughter into the home. And Tommy and I just both looked at each other and laughed that Father Trey brought her home. And we get her out of the car seat and we hand him the baby, and he's holding her, and we take a picture, and he offers a new mother's blessing and a new baby's blessing, and we made coffee. He kind of overstayed his welcome. I don't think he got the hint that we just had a baby. You say hi, you leave. But it was such a great hour with him, because before he left, he asked Tommy and I if we needed to go to confession. And we said, yeah, actually, that'd be great. So we got to start parenthood off with confession. He baptized Rose 3 months later, so he brought her home twice. He brought her home physically into our house, and then he brought her home into the life of the church. And whenever Rose sees Father Trey, it's Father Baptism, or Patre. That's kind of the nickname that we all have for him in town. And I always kind of go back to that moment of that cyclical nature of vocation. I met my husband on Facebook. We have this kid. A priest brought her into the house. He brought her into the church. We're surrounded by so many amazing religious sisters in our life and in our town and our community. That none of it's isolated, that none of it's without purpose, and that every moment of stretching, whether I'm annoyed with my husband eating his trail mix, or we finally get to go back out on that date and remind each other why we liked each other in the first place, and not just all the little nitty-gritty details of life that compound, it all centers back on this idea that the Lord calls us to particular people, calls us to particular places, calls us to particular moments where he asks us to do something great. But the asking of the doing something great and then the doing of that great thing is not what we're producing or what we can point to on the page. It's who we're becoming for the people around us that we're loving in distinct and unique ways. And so whatever your vocation is or has been, or whatever phase of life you find yourself maybe launching into a new phase of life or leaving behind one, or perfectly at peace with where you are, or feeling that itch that maybe the Lord is calling you to something new and calling you to a stretching, if we do that and if we respond to that, knowing we're holy and called to holiness, and knowing we're loved and can love other people from that place of being loved, it really truly does change the world. Do you remember that scene from My Big Fat Greek Wedding? The man's the head, the woman's the neck. In this world, we women have such influence and such profound power and can do so many great and amazing things when we know what it is that God is first doing within us. So all that being said, we're going to have some time in adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. I would ask if you wouldn't mind offering a specific prayer during adoration. My friend Rosie Hill, she is a young Catholic mom in the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia. Some people might know Rosie and her family. Their little 2-month-old daughter, Mary Margaret, passed away very suddenly last night. And a number of people are joining together in prayer, specifically at 3 o'clock this afternoon, to pray a Divine Mercy Chaplet. So if you think of praying for that family while we're in adoration this afternoon, I know they would be incredibly grateful. Her sister, Meg Hunter-Kilmer, and I are very, very good friends, and she asked me to please ask the people that I was with today to pray for the family. She was the youngest of their 8 children, so the family is deeply suffering today, and if you could please lift them in prayer, I know that they would be very grateful. Thank you all so much for being such an amazing group of women today. We're going to have this time of adoration, so if we can keep the church somewhat quiet as they prepare the church. If you need to take a break or go to the restroom, they'll give you instructions. But thank you all so much for your time today. We're truly grateful.